Welcome to the Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast, brought to you by BlueFletch. We discuss technology topics related to Android and workforce devices and how they intersect with business and mobility.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of the BlueFletch Mobility Roundup podcast. I got Richard Makerson, my business partner here, and joining us today also is Patrick McGlynn. Patrick, recently you did a webinar about Intune, right?
Yeah, that's right. We did a bit of a deep dive on some of the reasons why people choose Intune and some tips and tricks I've picked up along the way when testing, deploying Android devices.
Awesome. So for the next couple minutes, we wanted to talk about Intune and why you might want it, why you might not. So really highlights of Patrick's webinar. And I think the link for that webinar should be in the notes for this. So if you, at the end of this episode, you should be able to take a look at that as well. If you want to watch something a little bit more in depth, longer, definitely take a look at that. To get us started, Richard, I'm going to ask you the really hard question, which is why Intune?
Microsoft does a great job of making Intune economically attractive to customers.
It's a nice way of saying cheap.
Yeah, or it's value versus price. And so if you're a CIO of an organization or a director and Microsoft comes in and says we could save you $100,000, a few $100,000 a year over year by using this product that you're probably already paying for, it twists the arms of the organization, but you get what you pay for.
Is this the CIO, who used to be the CFO and change roles?
Yes, that guy. But but back to value versus price, it's like going hiking. Like you can hike in flip-flops, you can hike barefooted, but you would probably enjoy hiking a lot more. You would probably not have blisters on your feet if you had proper shoes. And for some cases, Intune is a great replacement. But, in our world in enterprise mobility, where you have shared devices, rugged devices, and the use case and the relationship between that device and the user is a bit different, Intune, could be a stretch if you're not prepared.
Got it. So, Patrick, I know in your webinar, you covered a bit of the Intune, the value adds, and some of these things to be thinking about, tips and tricks. Can you start out with what is Intune designed for? What are the scenarios where it works well?
Yeah, so a lot of organizations are already using Microsoft Endpoint Manager to manage all their Windows devices. They're setting up their laptops. Especially in a COVID world, you need some way to manage all these remote Windows laptops. Well, they've brought Intune into the fold as well to have a co-managed platform for your mobility devices as well, including Android. And so that's the Intune side of the house. And a ton of these Fortune 500 companies, probably almost all, if not all, are using Microsoft and Office 365 already. So this makes it really easy to add this into the fold. Bring in this capability and start managing your Android devices as well as your Windows laptops.
Got it. On the benefits, maybe you can dive into when you talk about co-managed. What does that mean? What is the benefit of co-managed?
Really just a single portal and a single source to actually manage all your devices, and be that on-prem or cloud or some combination of the two. Just having a place to actually manage everything together instead of having to have different vendor contracts, different agreements in place. Really trying to simplify that into a single pane of glass.
So Windows desktops, iPhones, Android devices,
Mac laptops, Mac OS. So yep, all those.
Cats and dogs living together. Got it. What are the other benefits when you're looking at Intune? What are the other things people typically call out as, or Microsoft will typically call out as being big value adds for switching to it?
I think one of the things that I found is the ease of leveraging your Azure AD or your Active Directory already. So you might have your users managed there. You have your security groups. If you need to leverage any of that, it's out of the box, ready to go. So that really just makes things simple for creating different groups for assignment or for security profiles. That's just no setup involved there. So that's one of the big driving factors I've seen. We've already touched on the lower cost option compared to some of the other big players out there.
What does that look like? Is it like order of magnitude? Is it half the price of the SODIs, or AirWatches of the world? What does that look like in comparison?
Well, their actually licensing model is a bit different. It depends on how you want to set up your devices. If you're going to do user assigned devices, then actually each user needs to have a license to their account. I think that's currently starting around $6 a year, if I'm not mistaken. And so, that is probably, less than half the cost of some, SODIs and Workspace ONEs out there. But an even deeper savings is if you're setting up dedicated or shared devices, you actually don't have to pay for each individual device as well. And I know a lot of the other MDMs and EMMs want to charge you for each device you have under management. So they've got a bit different thinking. They're actually doing a more user management subscription model.
Got it. Can that also be a drawback, though, that licensing model?
Yeah, I mean, it can be, depending on your organization. And there are some hidden costs as well. So that number I quoted is really not all inclusive. And I know we're going to get into that here in a minute, but yeah, there is some other costs associated as well.
Got it. And I guess just drawbacks. So as we've started talking about some of these other hidden costs, what are the other drawbacks that you've seen as you've seen people look at Intune and start to go to Intune?
I guess it's a different way of thinking of how you manage your devices. So other tools out there, you have your different silos for device management. Some companies call it organization groups, some call it folders, and they really silo devices and attempt to isolate, security profiles or applications existing outside of where they should. And Intune has a much more flat organizational structure. And so you've got to be really good and proficient with your Azure AD groups to make sure that they're acting almost the same as an organization group or a smart group in the Workspace ONE world, or a folder or some type of other structure in other MDMs. So I've found it is a little bit harder to provide access to users across the organization when they may just want to manage your store's devices or your supply chain devices, for example. It's really hard to actually provide those differentiated accesses in the same portal.
Yeah, and I feel like the complex scenarios we've seen in Workspace ONE would be things like, you have different countries in Europe that have different org groups, or and then within that you have different smart groups, things like the warehouses, the drivers, and then be able to have allocated access to the admins in those regions, right? We've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, and most companies want to have just one single AirWatch portal or Workspace ONE portal, and then they can have their stores and their DCs and their delivery drivers all segmented differently, but it's still rolled up into one cloud environment. Intune, you can do that, of course. It's just a bit harder to control that access layer.
And I think you mentioned this on your webinar, but doing that, you have to pair that with AD or Azure AD. Like, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So, AD has long been used for security roles, adding access and groups via groups to users. So that, of course, is how you're going to manage users in Intune by providing them groups or tags. And those can be dynamic. It's not a manual process all the time, but it's, again, just, make sure you're proficient with your AD, or you're working with your IT security InfoSec, and you have pretty close, tight partnership with them to make sure your AD is being managed properly. Otherwise, it is going to cause you some issues down the road. But yeah.
Got it. And Richard, you called this out when we were talking about this topic, but one of the other drawbacks was just lack of tooling. Can you talk about your high level? Maybe we can dive into this a little bit later in the end of the podcast.
Yeah. So Intune offers a great platform and a great interface for managing devices, managing endpoints, but they don't offer many tools to be able to install and get a little extra out of those endpoints. And for us, managing shared devices, having things around remote control or device analytics, being able to do things at a more granular level, it's just not available. So if it's not available out of the box, either you're going to have to build it or buy it from somewhere else. And so I think that's, one of the reasons why we do what we do because we recognize that there are these gaps in all of these UEMs. And so, we try to fill it.
Got it. And then I guess for setting up and managing Intune itself, Patrick, on your webinar, you called out some high level tips and tricks. You want to your favorite 2 or 3? You want to talk about what those are?
Yeah, sure. So the first one was around how you enroll devices. So we here at BlueFletch work a lot on rugged Android devices, and often that is in a shared user model. So multiple people using the device throughout the day, different shifts coming in and using the devices. And so in Intune, if you want to manage those devices, I would recommend enrolling them as dedicated devices. That doesn't mean they need to be in a kiosk mode or single use, single application. But in that enrollment method, Intune actually doesn't charge you for each additional device under management. It's leveraging the Android Enterprise APIs behind the scenes, which is also a free product from Google. So actually Intune doesn't charge you for those pieces. And I would recommend, if you can enroll all your devices in a dedicated mode, and then you can pair that with a tool like BlueFletch Launcher to actually control the user experience and give a more personalized user experience after the login. So it might feel like a personally enabled device, but it's going to be managed in the dedicated method in Intune. So just some cost savings for you guys, especially as you scale up, that can make a big difference.
And when you say all your devices, you're referring to those devices in those dedicated roles. So warehouse, drivers, store devices, not the BYOD side.
Correct. Not BYD, not the, corporate owned, personally enabled, which might be your, your C-level suite or something. They're going to have devices provided to them. That's going to be a more traditional, and you're going to have to pay for each user that has that license. Again, the cost isn't exorbitant, but yes.
Got it. You talked about tips and tricks for managing specific vendor type devices. Can you dive into that a little bit? Like what is that terminology? OEM devices or
OEM config, and it's an extension of the app config model, which is becoming really big in Android. The concept there is you can, when you deploy an application from the Playstore, you can also send the configuration file at the same time delivered from the Playstore. So a user doesn't have to go through and set up the application. There's no external configuration file. That's a method that's being widely adopted, and the OEMs have actually started adopting that as well. So Zebra, Honeywell, Nokia, Motorola, they all have their OEM configs available in the Play Store. And when you go to assign and deploy that, you can also set a huge number of settings. Basically, they open up the SDK or the EMDK for you. So any feature or control that Zebra might have is going to be available for you via that OEM config user interface. So it's really just a great, I call it a Swiss Army knife to fill the gaps of what Android Enterprise doesn't offer, or some specific OEM things like data wedge where you'd want to configure that. OEM config really just opens up that box for you and gives you the full range of capability, even if Intune or Android Enterprise don't support those capabilities.
Can you talk about Play Store for Android devices with Intune? I have to use Play Store for app deployments. Is that correct?
No, actually not. There are line of business applications you can upload and deploy. It's very limited in the actual configuration that you can also apply. So if you do that, you're still going to need to use the app config model. We know there's, in the enterprise space and in the warehouses, there's third-party apps, there's legacy apps that aren't going to support that model and may either never or, they're applications that still work fine and don't want to make a change. So you can still deploy those apps, but you're going to run into issues when you actually want to send out an external config file, for example, to go along with those applications.
Got it. So speaking of the sending out those, and Richard, we talk about third-party tooling and how that is a area where BlueFletch brings a lot of experience. You can go build your own tools. You can use a combination of OEM config, some other things. But for you, what are the things that, as Patrick has talked about this, that we really bring a lot of value or that we help with in the shared tooling space?
Yep. So our focus is on security management for enterprise shared devices. And so, our tooling revolves around that. And it starts with our launcher. And so many of the other UEMs have kiosk mode or this dedicated mode where you can lock down settings and only provide certain access to certain applications, but having a launcher that can take over as a home screen, that can allow you to have a more flexible deployment is something that we offer, and it brings a lot of value. And then it also pairs nice with our authentication modules. So having SSO and being flexible with that. So supporting all the major standards like Open ID Connect, Okta, Azure AD, but also being able to support one-off configuration. So we have some customers that have a major IDP, but they also have a backup in case the cloud goes out, or they only have a local intranet at the site. And even with our password manager, so it allows a single sign-on like experience with legacy applications. And so you're able to continue to have these applications that are like these workhorses that never need to be updated. They just work, but need to be supported on these modern devices, these modern scenarios. The next one.
Wait, are you trying to call out those people that are still running their AS400 systems from 92?
Hey, if it works and you can log on with BlueFletch SSO, keep running it.
Runs the business.
Next is reporting. And so, how can I have actionable intelligence that allows me to efficiently run my operations, or make changes, or have the information that I need to make adjustments? And so I think, Patrick, you mentioned that even just enrolling a device in Intune takes 10 minutes before it shows up in the portal.
Yeah, there was just, really a lag in the data coming across. And that was not only just device enrollment, but application deployment, seeing what devices were compliant, just extremely slow. And, I've done a lot of overnight deployments and, go lives. And if you can't get that data in a timely manner, it's going to be problematic, and you're going to be stressed about it. And you want that near real time insight into devices if you're going to be managing a production fleet of any size, really.
Yeah, that's big. If I'm only being able to see a change in enrollment every 10 minutes through the course of an hour, I can only iterate on that at best 6 times.
I like the math there.
There you go. I'm trying to be like you, Brett. But if I'm getting it near real time and getting it in a minute or two, that's 10x my ability to iterate. And if you're rolling out an update, or if a store or warehouse or a site is disconnected or not running, that's costing money, that's costing time. People are getting frustrated. More and more people are getting included on these emails. And so, you want to reduce that.
What is it? The 2 a.m. deployment and the store opens at 6:30?
Yeah.
You better be done by 6.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The second piece is remote control. So going back to operational intelligence, being able to see things that happen out in the field. We've all been in enterprise mobility for quite some time, and sometimes things uniquely happen out in the field that you can't reproduce in the lab or in another location. So being able to remote control into a device, reproduce an issue, or see a user reproduce an issue live, provides invaluable efficiency in solving problems. And so, not being able to have a remote control out of the box, for dedicated devices is a big deal.
Yeah, I don't know the exact licensing fee they charge for it, but it is a partnership. Intune partners with TeamViewer for that experience. So it's actually external experience even. One of the tools that BlueFletch does offer is remote control capabilities, and that is tightly coupled with our analytics platform that Richard's just got done talking about as well. So I just want to reiterate how important it is for that remote view or remote control. Oftentimes the end users aren't highly technical or will maybe struggle in describing an issue they're seeing or a problem. So being able to see that firsthand is really the fastest way to get from A to B.
And then, Richard, the last thing you had noted earlier was and it kind of goes back to Patrick's point around files and installing APKs. Like, I know there's some tooling you can do up above and beyond the Google Play Store. Can you talk about the things that you bring to the table for that? Yeah,
so it's a concept we call BlueFletch Enterprise Installer. And so it's still leveraging Android and Enterprise APIs, but also giving end users the granular control that they would want. And so with that, if you needed to synchronize how things are installed, you might need to include reboots or lay down a certificate, or things need to happen. A and B needs to happen before a C happens, because you have a legacy app or a legacy environment that you're working around. Our enterprise installer gives you that sense of flexibility. So being able to install certificates, moving files around, being able to synchronize things, being able to install from
a local store server.
I know parts of those pieces are possible, but you have to jump through some pretty high and tight hoops to make that happen. And so, we want to make that as easy as possible. We've been on that end of the stick where you have to be responsible for these devices going out, and anything that happens, whether it's your fault or not, gets blamed on you, and you have to figure it out. And so, we're just trying to provide those tools, to folks in the marketplace so that they can have successful deployments like we've had for our customers.
It's always your fault until you prove otherwise, right?
Yep.
Patrick, on this is one of the things I think goes back a while to the local store, servers or repos. Does Intune have any processes around relay servers or remote servers? Is that something that's out of the box, or is it just rely on the Google Play infrastructure?
Yeah, it's going to be the Google Play infrastructure there. And really, some of the other just two things I want to mention about Enterprise Installer and where it does fill other gaps is two things. One is staging devices. So we've done a lot of staging processes set up, and that is one area where you need those dependencies and have A and B to trigger before C. The second is OS upgrades, which are a struggle for really everyone, we found. And we use our enterprise installer as basically a checkpoint system to make sure you're satisfying checkpoints along the way before you actually go into that OS upgrade mode, which can have sometimes unintended consequences. So you want to make sure your devices are in the exact desired state with staging and OS upgrades, and that's where that enterprise installer works. And back to you, Brett, we are able to leverage local store servers to pull those files instead of having to pull from the Play Store. So it's just a great tool to really manage those devices and do things at a more granular level.
Got it. And then for Intune itself, Patrick, as I know it's a couple of years old, but how fast is it moving and catching up to other tools that are out there? What do you see? Where do you see it being in 3 years?
Yeah, I see in 3 years. I mean, Microsoft is always looking at Windows first, but I guess it was probably last year or 2 years ago, they've officially announced that they're going to support Android as their mobile platform of choice. So that means, more and more focus is going to go into Intune, go into the Android support. And one thing I really like that they do is they do put their roadmap and upcoming features as a public portal. So you can actually see the focus and attention they're putting on Android. And I think even in, 2 years, it seems like it's gone from 0 to 60 on how much we talk about Intune and how often customers want to get their hands dirty and start doing proof of concepts to see if Intune can be that replacement UEM or EMM for them. So big things definitely coming. Android Enterprise is obviously also a great shift in the paradigm for how you manage Android devices. So I think those things coming together are definitely going to be a success for any company that does make that leap. There are going to be some learning curve and some troubles along the way, but I think it's going to be good.
Cool. All right. So in summary for today, first point was it's cheap. No, wait, you said
economically attractive.
Economically attractive. So yeah, economically attractive. Intune is definitely economically attractive especially if you're an existing Microsoft customer. Second point, mixed fleet. So if you're managing, Windows endpoints, iOS, and then I guess IoT is something that Microsoft's starting to roll into the mix too, right?
Yeah, I've heard that there is limited support for IoT currently, just when you look at the market. So printers, wearables, et cetera. But I'm sure that will get addressed at some point in the future. I just don't think it's a priority right now.
Got it. And then the third point was for specifically around the shared device or the area where Richard and his team focus on, but that is, look at additional tooling or add-on tooling, so things like BlueFletch, or look at building your own to make sure you fill some of those gaps, specifically on the shared Android and workforce devices. Thank you guys for chatting with me today. And then, as I mentioned, so Patrick, you did that webinar. I think you had a lot of great feedback on that. So that'll be in the notes. So click on that if you want to dive into more about Intune. But thank you guys for joining me today, and look forward to the next episode.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast. If you enjoyed the discussion, please take a few moments to rate us. If you would like to listen to future episodes, please subscribe. To learn more about mobility topics or submit any questions, visit us at bluefletch.com.